Hi, folks. David Adams here from the Future Homes Hub. Welcome to the webinar that's designed to sort of kickstart off the Future Homes Standard consultation. So there are a lot of people on the call, and I see numbers are rising. So I'm just going to pause for a couple of minutes. We're expecting, I guess, 200 odd people, maybe more. So I'm going to hold for 1 minute while I see that number rising. So for those just joining, I'm just holding on for another minute. As I can see, numbers are clicking up of people joining the call. So we will hold for another minute to allow everyone to attend. But we do have a packed agenda. And indeed, why don't I, whilst we're just waiting for the last people to join, I'll briefly share the agenda with you. And look across at my fellow panel members just to check you can actually see the agenda. Good, I've got a thumbs up. That's always reassuring. It's funny doing these webinars because you obviously can't see anyone, so you do wonder a little bit whether you're talking to yourself. And of course, because I'm sharing now, I can't actually see people joining, so maybe Alex, you're my top left. What number are we up to?
224.
224, yeah.
Okay, is it still going up?
Still going up.
Okay, right. I tell you what, we're certainly getting there. Let's just talk very briefly through the agenda and what our process is going to be. So clearly, the Future Home Standard was launched on, when was that? Thursday? Time flies. What's it? Thursday, Wednesday, John? Yes, something like that.
Wednesday.
Wednesday. How could I possibly forget? Now, there's a lot of material there that's been published. I think Tessa had a look through. If you include the home energy metrics measurement stuff, that's 40 documents in total. We're not expecting everyone to read everything. What we're going to do today is give you a little bit of insight from a number of people from their first overview and looking for reactions, observations, and indeed clarifications that you'll be able to put into the Q&A function. We've split it into a number of key headings. You can see those on the agenda there in front of you. This is simply to allow us to manage our way through the process. This isn't suggesting that other areas are not important. It's just we have an hour and a half and we need to get through things quickly. Now, process-wise, what we'd like to do is, as we discuss a particular section, I'll make it clear what that consultation section number is. And what I'd ask is that when you ask a question, you just put the consultation section number in as the very first thing you type in. So if we're talking about the performance requirements of new buildings, new homes, you just start it with a 4, because that will help us manage the questions coming through. Second one is, I'd like you to use a little code, and we're going to come onto it in a second, for the type of organization you are. And indeed, we're going to do a little bit of a poll right after I finish speaking on which organizations are present on the call, so we get a sense of that. And in that, when you see the poll, you'll see there's just a little code. It just helps us understand where those Q&As are coming from, so we can help filter them through. As I say, the purpose is to raise this to your attention, and also gather your immediate feedback, particularly clarifications, can be observations, and indeed questions to the panel. Now, Future Homes Hub have gathered together a panel that will respond to, give you a little intro and then respond to some of those points. We also have John Palmer and his colleagues from DLUHC. John will do an introduction, and then we'll be very much listening to the questions that come through. All of the questions and clarifications and observations that we receive, we will collate and then put through to DLUHC, so they will see everything that you type. We, as you'll have seen, we are recording this, so it will be available for later. And we will analyze your observations as well, and reflect on what extra does the Future Homes Hub need to be doing in this space to help you respond to the consultation. We won't be doing a response ourselves, but we want to help you be as effective as possible in that response. So I think I'm pretty much done. I'll introduce each of the, no, I won't. I'll introduce them now. So we've got Alex from AES on the panel, particularly going to lead on the HEM part of the process. We've got Tom Norton from Fairheat to bring us in a little bit of district heating know-how into the panel. We've got Danielle and Oliver from Barratt Homes, again, very much in this space to give you that introduction and reaction. And as I mentioned before, we've got Richard Lancashire in the background. He's going to help a little bit with the collating the questions as they come through. And also we've got John Palmer from DLUHC, who will do introduction in one moment. But first of all, in order for us to understand who's out there, Hannah, could you launch the poll, and I will stop sharing the agenda. Okay, so this is really easy. Simply just click on the organization description that best meets your organization, and then we will leave that open for a few seconds. It should be quite quick and easy. We'll then close it, and then we get a little snapshot of who's listening in. Hannah, are the numbers still going up?
Yes.
Okay. I tell you what, why don't we just leave it running whilst John does his DLUHC introduction. We'll close it after John's finished. Over to you, John. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, David, and welcome everybody. My name is John Palmer. I'm the Deputy Director for Building Performance at DLUHC. So first of all, thanks very much to the Future Homes Hub for pulling this together so quickly. It's great to see the amount of interest and the number of people in the room, 335 and still ticking up. Really, really good to see. I think I don't want to say much, just really that this consultation has come out possibly a little later than we planned, as people might be aware. But now that it's out, I think people can see the complexity and breadth of the consultation. So hopefully you'll agree that it was important that we get this right. It no doubt contains some aspects that you were all expecting, but there are probably some aspects which we'll probably touch on today which are new, and I find quite exciting actually. So we'd be particularly keen to hear the views on those elements. As David said, we're going to take this away. We can't really offer any views or clarifications, particularly in a session where it isn't sort of available for everybody to see at the time. So what we will do is we'll take away anything that's not resolved in the room today, and we'll come back in the new year with clarifications that are available to everybody who might want to respond to the consultation. I think that's all I wanted to say, but other than that, David, back to you.
Thanks very much, John. Really appreciated having you here and listening into the Q&As. We'll do our best to position this correctly. I'm sure we'll hear if we don't. Hannah, could you give us a little bit of feedback on the polls? Brilliant. Okay. And we've got just over I know it's done it in percentages. It's just over 300 people. So that looks like we've got 6 small house builders, for instance, 30 odd mediums, same 30 odd large house builders. Next, a big category is about 60 manufacturers, and about 40 energy assessors. So that's a good spread. We will, sorry, I need to just go down a little bit. We've got about 30 involved with social housing. So you can see the balance there. A good spread on the call. Looking forward to your questions, clarifications, observations, etc. So thank you for that. What I'm very conscious of, this webinar is focused particularly on the Future Homes Standard Consultation, but we're also aware that on the 13th, the Minister of State for Housing also made a planning statement that is pertinent in this space. And if you're not aware of that, we want to draw it to your attention. We simply don't have time, as you'll have seen from the agenda, to get into discussions about this. But the top and bottom of the statement is that the improvement in standards that are already in force, together with those that they are due to bring in, subject to the consultation in 2025, the government said that is reducing the impacts and future environmental impacts, and it does not expect plan makers to set local energy efficiency targets. So this is quite a shift from current position. And that any planning policies, local energy efficiency standards of buildings that go beyond need to meet 2 criteria that they list, otherwise they would get rejected at examination. And that was those 2 being particularly the viability test, which already exists, and also the way that uplift would be expressed in terms of the TER. Really not here to go through the detail on it, but just to make you aware it is out there. And we're also very aware that there is a complete spectrum of views as to this being anything from a good idea to people being very upset and disappointed by it. We appreciate there's that full range of views. By all means, if you've for clarifications, for observations, questions, by all means, you can use the Q&A function for that. If you could just put a code LWES at the front of it so we can see that it pertains to this, we will collate those and we will obviously look at them ourselves, and we would pass them on to the DLUHC, but we're not going to spend any particular time here in the panel discussing it, because, as I say, we simply haven't got the time to do so. But we also didn't want to ignore it, because it is significant. If that's okay, as I say, by all means, Q&A wise, do put those questions, observations in there. And of course, we do, in that regard, have an election coming up. So any new administration will look at policies in this space. This applies just as much to the Future Homes Standard Consultation too, of course. you know, that feedback is going to be received in that kind of context. So without further ado, if I could pass across to Danielle. This is the consultation section number 4. So if you could start any questions relating to the local energy, sorry, the performance requirements of new homes with a 4 at the beginning of your point, that would be most helpful and help us sort it out. And if you were able to put your code of your organization after that 4, it would also help us sort questions. Danielle, without further ado, give us an introduction, please.
Brill, thank you, David. Good afternoon, everybody. So you've probably all spent since last Wednesday some nice bedtime reading with the Future Homes 40 documents to read. So I'm just going to give you an overview of section 4 and our interpretation of that. So also apologies in advance if I'm sniffling my way through, so I'm a bit under the weather today. So section 4, the performance requirements for new buildings, is primary focus from government is to reduce total operational carbon emissions, but also produce net zero ready buildings by using low carbon technologies such as heat pumps. So the consultation itself actually sets a whole building performance requirement. So it's still looking at regulated energy usage, primary energy and carbon emissions. But to set the new performance requirements within the standard, the government have actually modelled different building specifications to produce proposed notional buildings to achieve the most appropriate balance that they believe to deliver the carbon savings that they want, but also high quality homes that are affordable to run both now and in the future, that have got efficient low carbon heating options and renewable generation with good building fabric. So with all that combined, it's hoping that the options that they have put forward are cost effective, but one key one is the message that came through, deliverable by industry, when considering some of the issues associated with capacity, skills and supply chain. So the homes built under these new standards will deliver significant carbon savings, and they will be zero carbon ready. So there's the requirement that no retrofitting is going to be required to produce the zero carbon emissions as the electricity grid decarbonises. So over time, these homes will become zero carbon in their integrity. So with this, gas boilers, although it doesn't physically stipulate no gas boilers, it's anticipated that gas boilers, and this includes hybrid and hydrogen ready boilers, are unlikely to meet the new proposed standards. So that does push us down the low carbon heating options. So it discusses the notional building options, and the notional dwelling performance requirements for ventilation and fabric actually really closely resemble those within the 2021 Part L uplift of the building regulations. And the government are actually consulting on 2 options, and they believe that these 2 options are balancing costs and benefits for those. So one of those is without PV, and adding solar PV panels to the notional building is going to decrease the target emission rate, but deliver higher bill savings for the household. So those 2 options are option 1. So this balances the higher additional build cost against an even lower consumer bill. So it's not that it's not a good consumer bill, it's just even lower than the option 2. And this is the one that includes the solar PV panels, wastewater heat recovery, and increased air tightness with a decentralized mechanical extract ventilation system. And then we've got option 2. So lower carbon savings, increased bills compared to option 1, but as I said, still delivers expected bill savings for households moving from a typical home. But this option has the lower capital cost associated to it. Now within this, did you also want me to cover section 11 now, David, or take Q&A first?
Oh, I think let's dive in with section 11 and then we'll go for a full big Q&A.
Okay, so I'm also going to touch on section 11, but only a couple of minutes, probably a smaller area in the consultation. But this is associated to the proposal to amend regulation 11 to bring the regulation 26 within scope of relaxation or dispensation of that regulation. So the changes to the regulation will permit local authorities to relax the energy efficiency requirements where they judge that to fully meet the standard may be unreasonable to do so. So this is really in recognition so that the energy efficiency requirements set, because they become more stringent, there is a chance that some buildings legitimately just cannot meet these increased standards, often associated to building form. But there will be further guidance included in the approved documents, and the government is actually seeking views on examples of exemptions and what circumstances this may fall under. So that's my short 5 minutes overview. Thank you very much.
Danielle, a great job to condense quite a complicated document. So I'm just having a quick look at the questions, but let's start with a couple first of all. And actually, Danielle, could I ping this to you? A couple of people have said that the consultation document refers to the air source heat pump, but can't see reference to the likes of ground source heat pump or other heating technologies, actually. And the fact that it's a performance standard, so why are the prescriptive construction details within it? Could you just elaborate a little bit more on the notional?
So the notional is prescriptive, but that doesn't mean that that's what we have to actually do as developers to meet those standards. So that is just to set those performance targets and metrics. And if you were to build as defined by that, would you comply? But there is flexibility within that for us as developers to choose different specification options, which is inclusive of ground source heat pumps, alternative low carbon heating solutions, and or U values and fabric performance, and how we trade that off as long as we're still meeting the 3 metrics within that.
Perfect, Danielle. So short answer is, look, it was very much like our Ready to Zero report. In order to have a conversation and create your target, you have to pick a particular technology. That doesn't mean that that is the prescribed technology later. We're going to touch on a little bit the HEM, so the new SAP, as it were, because in that regard, it's how do these different technologies are portrayed within the HEM becomes the important item. If you build exactly the same as the notional, you know it will pass. If you change something, you need the HEM tool to tell you what you need to do. I've got a question to anyone on the panel from a local authority. There's no significant energy efficiency difference between 2021 regs and the Future Homes Standard. So the question is, how does this make these homes net zero ready? It goes on to ask, is the reliance majorly on grid decarbonisation? So nearly answered the question for us, but let's ping it to anyone on the panel to pick up.
I'm happy to start. I think from what I've seen and read, or bear with me, it only came out on Wednesday, and having a little play with the tool, in terms of carbon emissions, they are at circa that 75 to 80% that we were looking to achieve, that was recognised in the previous consultation. So the methods used have taken them to that standard, and then they will become zero carbon over time with the decarbonisation of the grid. So they are achieving a much higher carbon reduction than the 2021 regulations, if we're to use the standard notional dwelling specifications.
So yes, absolutely. Is there anything anyone else wants to add? I mean, in short, if you're electrically heated, we're going to talk a little bit about metrics, but you know, as I sometimes say, my shed at the bottom of the garden will become net zero. Yeah, hardly the point. Yeah, I have to say I don't have a heater in my shed at the bottom of the garden, but if I did, it would be. Can I just...
David, I think also the impact analysis does state that they did look at pushing the fabric harder, and the cost to do so was outweighed by the ability to spend that additional money on PV panels and etc. to really push for that carbon reduction.
And I think that's one of the questions that absolutely they will be seeking feedback on within that consultation. And if you really want to get into the detail, I do recommend people read, and I'm sure, Alex, you probably already have, the impact assessment that is related here. Because they look at that kind of analysis, albeit notably the impact assessment doesn't appear to look at the impact on grid. from different dwellings. It is in the curtilage of the development or dwelling. It doesn't look at grid implications. Tom, you wanted to jump into.
Yeah, I was just going to add, without wanting to jump too far ahead, to the heat network section as well. So there's the electrification of heat, obviously, as well. There's the potential to connect to heat networks and making use of waste heat from industrial processes as well, and being able to include that in. So it's also connecting to a heat network, and then the obligations on those heat networks at a larger level to decarbonise over time. So it provides that same slightly different approach, but it's the same end goal.
Thanks, Tom. That's great. Couple of others. In terms of what about someone? Sorry, I don't think I got this. Who it was from? Oh, from Ross. What about the building form factor and its impact on performance? Who'd like to pick that one up?
I haven't got far enough in any modelling yet to give feedback on that one. Don't know whether Alex has.
Sorry. I think it would be fair to say, though, that with the U values and the notionals that have been given, taking account of some of the work that the Future Homes Hub did, that's interesting. You know, I think when you've done HEM, hopefully that will enable more to be done. And then the second thing is there is this, and it might be covered later. Sorry, David. There is something in the consultation about the more difficult buildings having a reduction in the performance. So I don't know if that's covered later.
No, we are picking it up now, Oliver, and
yes,
Danielle touched on it briefly. Yeah. You want to explore that? I'll come back to the form factor because of the notional model, the notional approach. Yeah. So do you want to pick up on that, on the exception?
If Danielle's covered it, then it's covered. Yeah, there's basically the consultation is suggesting that local authorities, I believe, can reduce the requirement for very difficult buildings. So for when we're doing some work, that's mainly, say, flats over garages would be a classic example of where it's difficult sometimes to meet the requirements. So that's one of the consultation questions is, should there be something to help those types of buildings?
And I guess a key thing there that, again, I'm sure people will want to respond to in the consultation is about the rules and criteria that sit around that becomes pretty critical.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, David, with that as well, that's not just something the local authority will do. Developers have to apply for that dispensation. So there is an application process for it.
So again, look, all of these things are proposals out there, consulting on, getting feedbacks on. Just nipping back to the form factor, we're going to touch on it a little bit in metrics, but a notional building approach effectively takes the whatever house you've designed and applies those U values and those parameters, technical parameters to it to give you a target. So one of the limitations on a notional approach is it doesn't take into account form factor implications, or certainly it doesn't take into account well. It tends to ignore them. But I'll touch on that a little bit later when we talk about metrics. Conscious of other questions, which I haven't been watching closely enough. I don't know if any colleagues want to jump in on anything. Otherwise, I will pick another one.
There's a good one on, is there any attempt within the new Future Homes Standard to close the performance gap? I don't know if that's covered.
We'll pick on that. That's great. We will pick on that later on, Oliver. That's touched on. Interesting, we've got two questions on hydrogen. Do you think hydrogen will overtake electric in the future? And what are the current thoughts on hydrogen? Bearing in mind, look, this is a panel commenting on the Future Homes Standard, and bearing in mind when this comes into effect, yeah? What I would suggest, unless a panel member wishes to pick that up, it's a case of take a good look at the consultation, but remember, this comes into force in 25, 26. So hydrogen availability question, yeah. So I know that is something the government are still considering, and have, and there have been various statements made around. But remember, this is the timescale of this introduction is way before availability, certainly mass availability of hydrogen. Does any
are backstop U values mentioned in the standard, or just notional values?
Great one. Danielle, have you managed to get to that page?
Yes, they are. They're within the Part L draft approved document. You've got your limiting U values within there. And they obviously are different to the notional dwelling. So if you used your backstop U values within Part L, you wouldn't comply. They're your backstops. You still have to be able to meet the regulations. So you would go above and beyond those backstops in most instances to meet the standard.
And typically, I mean, is it like
0.26 external wall? I don't think they've changed from the 2021.
Right. And I'm not sure any of them are going to therefore, or very few of them will ever get used, because you couldn't.
Very unlikely, yeah.
Yeah.
I think roof maybe.
Yeah, roof. Just to help the guys out, there's quite a lot of questions around HEM, and I know Alex is going to touch this on in a minute. I think it'd be fair to say, everyone on the call, I don't think, I'm not sure if you have, Alex, but I don't think anyone's actually had a true go at HEM and put a building in. And I think that will answer quite a lot of these questions. But just for people on the call that are listening in, that is the next job, isn't it? That's so people cancelled Christmas, all the SAP assessors that we're using, and that's what they're, Danielle's smiling, but and that's what they're doing, because obviously that will have quite an influence on a lot of answers. Just to help out David a bit, I think there's quite a lot of questions that I think we'll really get into when a few people have had a go at putting houses into HEM.
Yeah, and we're going to pick up HEM, and we'll get Alex to do an intro so we can pick that up at that point. Yes. Or Alex?
I was just going to say, I think it's important to note with a lot of the questions coming in that it is a consultation. So taking view on a lot of this, so the answers aren't even, we can look at things, but we're not going to get solid answers out.
And part of this is, folks, these are really great questions, which is why we'll pass them on. Yeah. But I just encourage you, it's a consultation, put those into your consultation response as well. Yeah. For instance, there's one from someone anonymous, if only I could say that word, about the notional building description saying has modulating control, which seems fundamentally incompatible with an air to water heat pump. Yeah. Some of these detailed feedback is really important to get the framing of the final wording of the approved documents, etc., correct. And there will be probably some legacy things carrying over, and we're all frankly on a bit of a journey in this regard. Okay, look, we've got another probably 4 or 5 minutes. Has anyone else picked up any questions? I'm just looking back.
There's a few around technologies and their recognition in SAP. And I think probably just my response to that would be is, as developers, we're open-minded about technologies and look to review all of them. So feedback on that in part of the HEM and what was SAP Appendix Q, feedback and get technologies in there if you want them.
And that's a good point around new technologies. So the product characteristics database, which worked with SAP, will be no more. So there'll be a new way of assessing new technologies within the new HEM engine, which is there to provide more transparency and get more innovation in there quicker. So that's all we know so far. But essentially, selecting any technology now will require a rework, because HEM isn't compatible with the current PCDB database.
Thank you for that, Alex. I just picked up another one in terms of, has the impact on the grid, particularly peak load, be considered? We'll touch on that a little bit when we come to metrics, but and again, Alex, maybe you could pick that up when you're giving that intro to HEM, because that's one of the big reasons for moving in that HEM direction. Okie dokie. Who wants
There's a question on EPC ratings, which is fairly easy.
Go for it.
Within the consultation, it does state there's a separate EPC consultation that's going to be due out. I think it's 2 to 3 months within somewhere in the various documents. So there's a question around EPC ratings for Part L 2021, where you've got gas and PV. To get there, you get very high A-rated EPCs, and what will happen moving to heat pumps and therefore to the EPCs. I think, you know, that's a bit of an unknown, and we'll see through the consultations and the costings and everything that sit behind it. But essentially, a heat pump with PV, as per option 1, will be, I would have thought, a good EPC, and option 2 would be not so good EPC.
Absolutely. We'll see what that consultation brings forward, and also what would impact that. And we've had some questions on cost in there too, is if they move the social and environmental levies off electricity onto general taxation, which is quite a push at the moment, or indeed others argue for those levies to be shifted from electric, where they are primarily at the moment, and move them onto gas. If the cost of fuel changes, that fundamentally changes obviously the running costs of the home, but also how they're expressed within the existing EPC regime. Clearly, the EPC regime, as Alex is saying, may change too. I think we'll just pick up 1 or 2 more whilst the panel are just having a look at those. I'm going to pick up on something in terms of the date that the consultation is reviewed. It is open for 3 months. All encouraged to respond in full, or more realistically in part. But there is commitment to legislate in 2024. Bearing in mind there's quite a lot of work to do in order to achieve that, and won't be lost on you, there is an election in between, almost certainly. I don't think that's absolutely guaranteed. I think they can run to January next year, but obviously that means that there are variables here that are unanswerable. But that would be the commitment. And I think, Oliver, you're going to be picking up a little bit about transitional arrangements later. Folks, is there any last question or observation you want to just drop in? Or should we move on to, where were we going next? We were going to move to heat networks.
Okay.
I glanced down. Right, let's go across to Tom at Fair Heat to give us an introduction on heat networks, please.
David. Okay, so initial impressions of the consultation. So it looks like, so as Danielle touched on, we're effectively moving to default heat sources are for individual homes, heat pumps, and for larger scale systems, so communal systems, looking more towards heat networks and communal heating systems and district heating systems. It's specifically stated in the actual consultation that communal and district heating networks will be the preferred way of providing heating and hot water to flats under the Future Homes Standards. They've been quite clear in the direction of travel there, and the comment about direct electric and immersion heaters not providing the cost savings whilst still potentially being carbon savings. So there's a clear government commitment there to at least meet the 18% climate change committee target of 18% of heat in the UK to be delivered by heat networks by 2050. And because of that, there's also acknowledgement that heat networks play a strategic role in the entire UK energy sector. So the heat networks can provide off-grid power and be able to shift peak powers around the networks locally and nationally as well. So there's recognition that heat networks have a bigger part to play in the whole energy sector. It's worth pointing out that these regulations will also interact with the heat network zoning, which is looking to come in 2025. And also there's the heat network regulations, both the technical and customer regulations, which are also looking to come in 2025. At this stage, obviously, because it's quite early in the consultation, it's not really clear how all of these are going to completely interact with each other. How, for example, zoning, if you're building in a zone, how that interacts with the building regulations. Moving on to specifically onto the notional building. So again, Danielle mentioned about the notional building. So previously, in the last version of SAP, we looked at having a new heat networks and existing heat networks were treated completely differently. That's been changed, and now what we're looking at is having an actual completely different notional building if you have a dwelling on a heat network. So now you're no longer you're comparing your notional dwelling against a notional heat network dwelling as opposed to a notional dwelling with a different energy source. That's a 4th generation heat network. So what I mean by that is a low temperature, not ambient loop, but a low temperature heat network. And it's compared with a air source heat pump and with some standard losses on the primary and secondary side. So some particular things to note, I'd say on the losses side is that they've now stated in the notional building a secondary loss factor, which is in a watts per dwelling factor, which is in line with how the heat network industry works out losses on systems. There's a 62 watts loss, which is quite ambitious. It can definitely be achieved, but it's quite a stringent target. It will have an impact on how you design heat networks within buildings. So the way the length of the network, the way the buildings, the amount of rise and things like that. So consideration will have to be taken very early on about how you actually design your heat network to make sure that you can hit those targets. There's also primary loss targets that's provided as a percentage, and that just applies to district systems, not communal systems. So that's only going to apply if you've got a much larger system. And just finally, there's one particular additional major thing that's been brought in is sleeving. So they're looking at bringing sleeving, which means that any new or unused low carbon heat sources on an existing heat network can be used to directly offset new connections. So that means if you have an existing heat network that's currently run by gas systems, but you want to connect on new buildings, if you install a low carbon system, a heat pump, then that can be used, the low carbon heat generated by that can be allocated directly against the new dwellings. And there's also potential to use some existing, if you have existing low carbon heat on your heat network that could be used. The details of that are to be released later, and there's going to be a further consultation about how you actually apply that. And the final thing is there's also looking at future waste heat sources. So there's now they're proposing a 3-year period where you can, if you connect to a heat network, you can apply carbon savings from certain technologies like waste to heat that aren't expected to be installed for the next 3 years. So you can actually retroactively apply carbon savings that you expect to be produced on the heat network in the future to the dwellings at the time. So I think that's and again, that's something that's going to need a lot of ironing out about how's that enforced and the procedures around that to make sure that commitments made to installing low carbon equipment onto existing heat networks are maintained. But I'd say those are the very quick sort of 5-minute intro to the big changes in the consultation. Back to you, David.
Thank you very much for that. I'm just looking down at the questions, and let's have a look. We've got some embodied, which I'll pick up when I'm talking metrics. Okay.
I saw one earlier on CHP. So existing,
yeah, that's on existing DH systems relying on CHP. Will decarbonisation be required? Air source heat pump energy centre supplemental by the time the Future Homes implementation 25-26.
Yeah, so I think I think that's partially addressed through the sleeving argument. So existing heat networks that are relying on CHP will still be able to operate the CHP engine and rely on that, but any new connections onto that network will need to have specifically low carbon technology applied to that. So a new installation of heat pumps, or if there's already heat pumps installed in the system, there may be a mechanism of using that.
Cheers, Tom. And there's a question here: are networks still going to be incentivized to register on PCDB?
So my understanding is that, as Alex said, PCDB is going to be completely ripped up and started again. Heat networks are going to be on that. So if you have an existing heat network, then you'll want to put that heat network onto the PCDB, and then people will be able to use that within the HEM. That's my understanding. But I think again, that's something that's still being ironed out, how that will actually work, because that will be the mechanism that will also be operators will use to apply the calculations to show that the new equipment they're installing will be applied to this new particular scheme and things like that, and also the primary losses of the system.
And Tom, we've got a question here from Richard Warren, manufacturer. Has any thought been given to where networked heat pumps / shared ground loops fit into these regulations? These see individual ground source heat pumps, individual homes, all connected to a shared ground loop. If you want to have a look at the actual question, it was at 242 from Richard.
Yeah, so this is a bit of a big topic all in itself about what is a heat network and what isn't a heat network, and a different government policies applied consider different things to be heat networks and not. So it seems to be, but this is completely my opinion, and I don't think it's really that addressed in the consultation at the moment, that shared ground loop approach would be considered as an individual heat pump. So you're just getting a heat pump in your home, and you're just getting a ground source supply into your heat pump in the home. I think where there's an even bigger question is how ambient loop is going to fit in, because it's a bit of both. It's a heat network, but it's also you have to have a heat pump in your dwelling. So I think those will be the kind of things that will be ironed out over the next few months about how those edge cases can be applied into the calculation tool. And I haven't had to, I haven't used the HEM in Anglia yet either to kind of really see how it all applies.
Thank you very much. That's most helpful. I'm just looking down to see if there's one from John. New heat networks well on low density sites. He cites a CIBC technical standard. It looks like it's a note to all. It's an observation. So with the different primary heat loss for a dense and less dense sites. So there wasn't a question there. I should have looked a little further down. Tom, thank you very much. Keep the questions coming to all of the sections. Just please put the section number in advance of them. That way we can see them and respond appropriately. And they will, as I said before, they will all be sent across to DLUHC. So looks like time's come to just spend a little bit of time, and it's only a little bit because you'll see why if you don't already know. Metrics. So this is consultation section number 5. So questions on metrics, if you could start them with a 5, that helps us. As you will see, we've got a nice lot of, well, nearly 100 questions, up to 100 questions. So hence the coding system really does help. And I'm looking towards both Oliver and Danielle to give me a little bit of support on this. Metric side. So in short, the original current metrics that those that work particularly on the energy modeling side of things will be very, very familiar with. Others will be, I'm sure, aware of. The focus is dwelling emission rate and target emission rate, primary energy, both dwelling and target, and fabric energy efficiency, dwelling and target. And it explains a little bit about what they are capturing within the consultation document. They state what their desired outcomes are for the Future Homes Standard, being to protect occupants against high energy bills, reducing energy demand of homes, including peak demand, obviously operational carbon emissions reduction, recognizing the grid is decarbonising, but also, and this is always a tricky one, being simple to understand by the industry and provide flexibility for developers. And the problem is, obviously, we're used to this, you're used to it. You're trying to juggle lots of different things, lots of different outcomes. What they're doing there is saying they need a minimum number of metrics in order to deliver the outcomes. And finally, one that I'm repeating, but at the bottom 5, was considering the peak electricity demand. Now, Alex will pick up on this next when we move to the HEM, because this was a big argument for moving the from SAP, which was a monthly average. But peak demand is really important. It came out of the Ready for Zero report that we released earlier in the year. Their conclusion, having also looked hard, and there's a commentary on that within the consultation, about moving to a do you know what, when your mind goes blank? So moving to a EUI, energy use intensity metric, was one that they have considered and they've given some feedback on, and I appreciate there'll be a number of people on the call that are keen on the energy use intensity metric. It is an interesting one, really interesting. We reviewed it for the Ready for Zero report as well. And the short answer is nothing is perfect in this world. So it is worth, whether your view is positive or not, again, with the EUI, is having a look at the government's consideration of. But where they've ended up is effectively retaining the existing metrics, being the dwelling emissions, the emissions, the primary energy, and the fabric energy efficiency. It will be interesting when we model existing homes, or the homes being built now within the HEM, and see how they perform within that environment, particularly with regarding the peak load and the implications on the primary energy metric in that space. This is where how the HEM works becomes really significant in terms of what the implications are for construction, and you simply can't say too much until you've tried some models, I think would be true to say, Danielle.
Yeah, I would agree.
So on that note, let's turn to questions in terms of metrics. So this is number 5, and I've seen quite a few come in. I've obviously not read them yet. So if my colleagues want to pick up on any, I'll have a quick look.
I think the ones I've seen, David, are 5 metrics doing change, but we need the software to see how it tackles our house types. What do you think will, when do you think we'll have a concrete version to use?
Well, I mean, we'll leave that to Alex, I suggest. It clearly is absolutely key, which is kind of why we've ordered them in this this way. But Alex can pick that up in his intro. Yeah.
There a methodology for new homes attaching to an existing DH, and that's probably a district heating question. Sorry, it says 5 and 9. So.
Tom, do you want to pick that one up briefly?
So the methodology, so there'll be the different notional building. So I think everything is the same. So the option 1 and 2, those 2 options for the performance of the building is exactly the same. So the U values, the PV on one of them, mechanical ventilation, the other one. So that side is exactly the same. It'll just be there'll be a different notional heat source supply, which will be the heat network, and that'll be the only difference. Apart from then, there's also the potential about the sleeving, which I mentioned about. What is the carbon intensity of that heat you're connected to if you're connecting to a larger network?
Thanks, Tom. And I see Ross Graham has made the observation that fabric is diminishing returns, but reducing air tightness is key. Again, we'll see how the HEM reflects that in its calculations. And what we found when working with particularly low energy buildings, has to be said lower than is currently proposed for Future Homes Standard, SAP was really creaking. So it will be interesting to see what how HEM performs in that environment. I'm just looking for other metrics questions.
Can't see any, David. I've been trying through them, so I wondered if we go forward and if some come up, we pick them up.
Absolutely, pick them up as we go, which would allow us to move across to Alex from AES. Thank you very much, Alex. Over to you for a quick intro. Yeah. You've also been, hey, you're cheating really. You've got some teed up questions, yeah? Luxury. Go.
Not straightforward ones though. And yeah, three minutes to sum up HEM. So I will try and do that. So yeah, as everyone's seen, the home energy model, or the HEM, is deemed to be the SAP replacement. So I thought I'd just cover what's actually been published and what we actually need to review. So there's the home energy model consultation. So this explains the overhaul of SAP and seeks views on the approach taken by the home energy model. You've then got the home energy model Future Homes Standard Assessment Consultation. So this is a separate document which seeks views on the proposed methodology for demonstrating compliance with the future home standards. So you've got things in there like occupancy, weather data, thermal zoning. It's the technical questions that sit behind the methodology. We've then got the home energy model assessment tool itself. So the beta version, which we've been playing around with and have got some results, in inverted commas, I'll say. Home energy model, then we've got all the technical documentation. So under all the categories, heating, cooling, demand, thermal mass, energy for domestic hot water, etc., there's much more technical information that sit behind it for anyone looking to seek that. Then we've also got the home energy model reference code. So this is the full source code which sits behind the new engine. So we're really moving from a steady state SAP tool to a full dynamic central engine. I had to Google Python code, which is in the consultation, and it came out as source code. Is what we call the human readable computer instructions written by programmers. Essentially, it's what's under the bonnet of the HEM. So as I said, the home energy model will replace the existing standard assessment procedure, or SAP. The new model will be used to demonstrate compliance with the Future Home Standard and to produce energy performance certificates. So yeah, as we said earlier, important to note, the consultation doesn't cover EPCs. The government intends to consult on EPCs in the coming months. The HEM is described as a tool fit to support the transition to net zero. Government and industry alike have, we've all stated, and David just mentioned, SAP's creaking a bit with a lot of the new innovation and technologies that we can't now model within SAP, or effectively model in SAP. It was published 30 years ago, or first used 30 years ago, so it's quite old now. And obviously there's been multiple iterations, gradually becoming more complex up to the latest SAP 10, which we use. So the home energy model incorporates a number of structural changes to enable a more open evidence-based methodology and increase its potential applications. So as I said, it's an open source methodology. So define code that's unambiguous and provides enhanced transparency. It can then also be refined and expanded and changed over time. So as things change, i.e. the grid becomes more decarbonized, the model that sits behind it can be changed more effectively and efficiently. One of the big changes to the delivery model and provision of software. So we're now talking, as I said, about a central engine. So software providers and others can create sort of their own user interfaces that use the central engine. We talked about revised database of products. So we talked about the PCDB sort of being reformed or rebuilt. I'm aware a lot of the existing data, you know, will stay within it, but just needs to be updated to be suitable for use in the HEM. Recognizing new technologies, so the removal of Appendix Q, which is the current sort of workaround spreadsheet to feed into a SAP if a new innovation comes forward. So that's proposed to be removed, and the new engine will allow more transparency and hopefully speed up the process for innovation and getting new technologies into the HEM. And lastly, on the sort of structural changes, is using wrappers to distinguish different use cases. So essentially, this is sort of modules that work within or around the engine to do other things. So you'll have a central engine, the home energy model, and then you'll have different wrappers that can be for lodging EPCs, can be future homes compliance, but there's then a potential for a huge amount of other wrappers. So I think Tassos asked a question earlier about linking to RD SAP and existing buildings. So potentially that's another wrapper that can be used to benchmark. Whole life carbon, all sorts of stuff that can be built around the HEM to provide, you know, much more usable information. Probably running out of time slightly, so I'll speed up. So what's new? This is just a few things I've pulled out, by no means a full list, but some of the examples. So we talked about sort of peak energy. So the building is now analysed every half an hour rather than SAP's 12 snapshots to represent each month of the year. So we're moving, you know, it's a huge shift going from every half an hour of every day to just once a month. So this is to assist with smart technologies, storage, load shifting, dealing with peak energy demand and understanding that. We've also got regional weather variances. So this is, you know, partly to assist with obviously moving to, you know, low temperature heat pumps and the like. So they're obviously using a set weather file for the middle of the country. I think it's East Pennines in SAP. Won't represent heat pumps being modelled in the south or north of the country. So there is now sort of regional weather variance. Modelling thermal zones. So setting up the HEM with thermal zones. So adding in walls and running them independently. It includes building warm-up time. This includes solar gains for absorption from buildings' opaque elements, which is a change from SAP. Hot water demand, so it's no longer floor area, a calculation based on floor area and the amount of bath and showers you have. It's based on hot water demand schedule, which is formed from how many baths, showers, the volume of the bath, etc. Someone touched on the questions as well. Individual window information. So instead of a blanket U value and G value for the glazing, you now, or the HEM seeking to look at view on adding individual windows. So the U value and G value for the given size of each window on a home. And yeah, overhaul of PV and battery modelling. So, you know, fully integrated into the electrical generation and calculation. So some initial observations from us, obviously linking and the resolution is essential to be a sort of slow engine, how quickly we can look at different options. Adding in things like pipe work, so you've got to now measure all the volume, length, and level of insulation. The sort of level of M&E knowledge needed to complete a HEM is enhanced. And then some sort of concerns around, I'm sure there'll be some questions on unintended consequences with these changes. What will it actually mean? And the rollout of the engine. I think one of the questions was when will we see a concrete version of SAP? I think the answer is we don't know. The consultation will need to finish. They'll need to get the responses back. They'll need to build that into the final engine that's then built and rolled out, and then we'll need a user interface. So I don't know if anyone will know the answer to that question, but that's it from me, David, for now.
Excellent, Alex. Thanks for that rapid rattle through. Look, I guess it's important just to emphasize how important the HEM is. You don't need to read the full suite of documents. You don't need to read the source code unless unless you're really into this or got insomnia, I'm guessing. The worth saying, Alex, the ISAP version of HEM is known to be,
yes,
we're told very clearly it is very clunky. That interface is for consultation purposes. Yeah. That is, don't take that as the assumption of that's what a SAP assessor or say a HEM assessor is going to have to work with. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, as part of the government's work, it also cross-reference between other modelling tools, so PPHP and passive house systems and other things. So a lot of the outputs from the beta ISAP, the new beta SAP, does pull out all sorts of other things, and you have to add in other things that you wouldn't normally I expect you wouldn't normally have to do. So it's as we know, it can be clunky, and it takes quite a bit of time to get a model in.
It does, and I guess that's where it's recognized that's the case, and it's absolutely expected that future versions will be far slicker. And as I understood it, there are certain things you'll probably end up having to enter a lot of information about that you might not later on. It may use defaults and assumptions and things like that. So there's an element of we'll have to see. The thing, as I understand it, the consultation, there's a separate consultation for HEM, note, yeah. It's asking particular questions about the implementation of this important tool. It is a big step, but a really necessary one, because it allows there's been quite a lot of questions about grid load and peaks. Yeah, it allows those to be modeled and therefore optimized in order to reduce them. So that's great. Quick question that might have answered, but let's put it across to Alex and Danielle. 256. The industry has developed efficiencies and time savings using SAP over 20 years. HEM is significantly more complex, and result will not be available instantly as per current software. What are your thoughts, Alex and Danielle, in terms of industry experience of HEM speed and performance? Will we even know that at this stage, because it's in a different programming language,
probably not. I think I get the gist of the question. Yes, there's lots of process and procedure in producing a SAP calculation, and the industry, both developers and assessors have developed that over the years to get to a point where you can calculate the SAP sort of with some speed and what have you. So the HEM, by looking at the HEM from the outside so far, it does seem to be much more intensive in its use, and the number of inputs that are going to be required.
Excellent.
So the answer really is we don't know, but I think it's going to be a lot harder.
Oliver.
I mean, Alex and Danielle are much more expertise. I mean, there's lots of questions about HEM, passive, PHPP and stuff. And I think that definitely, from what I can see, and the guys can correct me, the tool is looking to be more dynamic, to enable it to take a more complex home from when it was developed. Sadly, I remember 25 years ago. So I think that's the whole point. And I think, there's a lot of questions about how complicated it is. It is going to be longer to do HEM because you have to put more information in, but it enables you to develop more, look at more complex homes with different regulations than previous. I think the reality to most of the questions, until we really get into it, I don't think you're going to know how much longer and how complicated, but I think it's fair to say that it is more dynamic. There's more information needed for it. Unless Alex and Danielle disagree, I thought that might, because there's a lot of questions of that around that area, and it's sort of, if that helps.
Yeah, I think I would agree. And I think given some of the changes as well as developers, there's going to need to be a greater review, just not of the platform and the software and how it works, but how we approach things as developers, and specifications as well, particularly with weather files and the like. When you're national and doing one specification suits all, so there's the complexities around that as well that need to be considered.
Indeed, absolutely. I think it would take some time to know those elements, remembering that the consultation version is for a particular outcome, that not to be confused with the commercial tool that will follow. We don't know when, of course. In terms of, there have been a number of questions about existing homes and HEM. Understanding is that the HEM will be evolved into an RD HEM, so the equivalent to the RD SAP for existing homes, a reduced data version of HEM. And I think, again, really important, really good. You've got a lot of products and also service offerings about that utilize load shifting, for instance, different times of use tariffs. Those can be reflected within a HEM environment because it's a half-hourly calculation rather than the monthly calculation that the SAP currently undertakes. So there are some really good opportunities here, but not underestimating there is going to be, hey, look, we'd have to get to grips with something that is quite big and new. So growing pains might be the word.
David, I've seen there's 3 questions sort of asking the same thing around.
Go for it.
Is the HEM a design or an assessment tool? Or, I think the same was sort of said for SAP. SAP was used as a design tool and an assessment tool, rightly or wrongly. And I would hazard a guess HEM will do the same.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it was always theoretically, it's not a design tool until you say that actually that's what house builders have to comply with. And then, of course, it's a design tool. Yeah. That's how it ends up being used by dint of the requirement on house builders. But I'm conscious, look, there are lots of good points made. We've got to move it on, but these will be all passed across to DLUHC, yeah? And we will analyse them too. But Alex, that was a really nice segue into the next very short element on real world performance of homes. So directly to your question, I mean, in short, what is quite exciting, hey, look, this is me talking, I'm sure lots of people out there will find this exciting too, is you can put a wrap around it, yeah, or a set of parameters that give you a compliance output, yeah. But the intention is you can put, I think they call it a wrapper, around, which is basically different assumptions, input assumptions. So you could reflect the actual weather that you've been measuring in use, yeah, the actual internal temperatures, the actual small power loads, with a time base, in order to understand what the actual energy use should have been. I.e., you know, this isn't, homes aren't, you know, run with standardized people in them. So therefore, it's really difficult to tell, is this home performing or not? What the HEM will allow is a different, you would be able to absorb that real information to get a better prediction of what that energy use would be. And that kind of plays to the real world performance element of the consultation. So this is section 8, a relatively short section, but a brand new one. Yeah. So the observation from government that there can be a gap between the anticipated outcome of homes and how they actually perform, and recognition that this becomes increasingly important, not just from a running costs of householders' perspective, but putting unnecessary additional pressure on the electricity grid, which we've got to build out. So this is avoiding additional investment in grid reinforcement, generation, and storage. So that's why they're asking questions in this space. They have, in 2021, introduced some additional aspects to aim to reduce the performance gap where it exists. For instance, photographs, additional guidance, the Brell report, but it's still not kind of measuring what's really happening. So in this consultation, they are seeking views on asking housing developers to carry out voluntary post-occupancy performance testing of homes, and make those results publicly available. So an interesting questions being asked. They give some criteria for these tests, being simple, capable of being rolled out at scale, non-intrusive, and they reference the SMETA's program that DESNES have developed. Now, Future Homes Hub have produced a bit of guidance on this as well, or a guidance document that is very well worth a read. And I have to say, I would say that, wouldn't I? Because I was working with the group that developed it. We issued that a few months ago. So they're looking for feedback, asking these questions in the consultation with a view to, and subject to that feedback, and of course, what happens politically, consulting in 2025 on specifics with a subsequent implementation in 2026. So do take a look at section 8, real world performance of homes. I'm just having a quick look to see if we've got any questions in there. So I think, Tony, you talk about credits to, I think I'm reading that as to encourage the voluntary use. I think that's something to perhaps put in ideas and thoughts. I would say put in the consultation. Now's the time to implement it. Oliver, have you got any reactions to that?
Yeah, no, it was credit specific to POEs as well. You probably saw that, post-occupancy evaluations.
Absolutely. So how do we encourage that in that space? Yeah, and it's not just, you're right, Oliver, to point it out, we're not, when we're speaking, we're not talking just energy. In this context, I'm not sure. Yeah, but again, it's a consultation. Let's hear these views. Yeah. Let's also have a look at, will it only give an idea of real performance in fabric and systems are stored correctly without an HTC being penalised? So I'm speed reading the question, which is never very good. Yeah. The point is the combination of measuring performance and having the HEM should put us in a position where we understand much better how our homes really perform. And we suspect there are probably some quick wins out there for, because starting measuring, you learn, we can close off some of the low-hanging fruit, yeah, probably quite quickly and cheaply. We simply haven't been encouraged to measure at any sort of scale before. So I guess, again, let's look for your thoughts and opportunities being fed through that consultation process. There is, Richard, there is a section on smart meters. We're not going to actually, well, perhaps Oliver is going to touch on it. He is going to. I'll leave it for Oliver then. I'm also very conscious of time, so
I'll make the time up for you, as always.
Oh, you're so kind.
That's right.
Let's yes, let's pass across to you, Oliver.
Okay. Cool. I've got a few subjects to cover, so I'm going to trundle through them quickly. I think I got them.
And you don't need to cover them all, Oliver. Just
okay. Well, I'll try and cover the ones I think are most critical to me. So, transitional arrangements. You'll be aware there's two options: there's 6 and a 12-month option around the laying date and regulations coming into force. And as previously, then there's a 12-month period after that, and they'll be applied to individual buildings again, is what the consultation is suggesting and wants comment on. The only other thing on that is really there's what they call sunsetting of previous transitional arrangements, and it's worth noting. So that basically means that all houses should be up to 2021, 2010 and 2013 should be moved up for any units. So that's definitely worth a view. Part O, there has been a call for evidence post the introduction in December, and basically government seeking views and evidence on the extent of overheating issues in homes created through material change of use. And Let me think of the other things. Yep, there's some information on heat pumps, updated guidance and minimum standards around heat pump efficiency, comfort and cooling efficiencies, ventilation. So they're looking to support this whole transition across to low carbon. Smart meters, so they are proposing guidance and update on smart meters around location, space around the materials which block signal propagation. Around energy efficiency requirements, I mean, as always, primary involved changes of approved documents and notional building specifications, but it is intended to reflect dual aims, and this is quite in a few areas, dual aims of the Future Homes Standard to look at reducing carbon emissions and conserving energy. So it's the two, which is probably previously what's been missed. And then we've talked about HEM enough and about the notional approach. Okay.
Oliver, perfect. Yes. So transition wise, in particular, certainly that's one that the implementation board and the implementation groups will be looking at closely. Now, as we understand what the target is for the Future Homes Standard, looking across at...
Oh, sorry, David. Yes, sorry, there was a question on transitional amendments and how long it lasts for and all those. I think in the consultation you can do whatever you know, your answer can be as you see fit. There's always that notional option. I think the key around transitions is to look at all the other aspects and how transition impacts or helps that process. That's the whole point of transition. And so I'm sure government will be looking for comment on what length of time, what affects that length of time, what influences that length of time in everyone's own opinion. So that's part of what the consultation will.
Yeah, and it's probably worth emphasizing what they are looking for is evidence of, is why you have an opinion. They'll be looking at the why rather than the fact you believe something. So this is very much, if you provide evidence, that is what will be taken into account. David Adams can have his view. What they'll look at is what's the evidence that caused me to form my view. So it's the evidence. I would urge people in all of these questions, if you're given an opinion, it's an opinion. They'll be looking for the evidence that sits behind it.
Just looking quickly.
I'll pick up one.
Probably a good one, because that's been asked a few times, is anyone have an idea when potential laying date is? And no, that's not in the consultation, doesn't advise that. There is, I don't think, and there's a lot of documents, so if I've missed something, tell me. It doesn't advise that, but there is previous view from government as to when they wanted to lay this. So you can always look back, if you like, to see what dates that they had tried to look to get the release.
And part of this is you reflect on your own, view of when is the election going to be, because that's going to be in between. Certainly the intention is to lay it in 2024. But plans, etc. Nobody knows. It's not an answerable question. But as Nigel said there, if it went in 2024 late, and then there was 6 months, because they do consult on 6 months or 12 months between laying and it coming in force, and then the 12 months that they've proposed for the transition itself.
I think I don't know if everyone can see the questions, but Tassos.
Yes, they can.
Tassos had a little go at trying to work out what the timings would be, so everyone can do that sort of thing just to help. Just a few things, other ones, David, too. People that have put timing, so I think everyone can try and work it out themselves. Prize for the one that gets closest to it. Will photographic records be dropped if testing is introduced? Which is probably more for you, David.
I suggest it. This is the kind of thing they'll be looking.
It doesn't say it in the consultation. It doesn't say, but obviously that's what they're looking for, people to suggest things as to what they see as what they'd like to see.
Someone's asked, will the questions be shared with the recording? I would expect so. All of this is going to be public. If in that regard people would like their name removed, if they've used their name, they'd like it removed, simply drop Hannah.
Perhaps so it's worth noting this won't be publicly available on like the website or anything. I would suggest this will be to individuals that the video will. I don't know if the questions will be publicly available.
I will check.
Yeah.
Quite possibly. What we may do actually though, Oliver, let's do this. We will make them all anonymous.
Yeah. Let's do that.
In fact, let's take that as a decision. We'll make them all anonymous. It's no need to have a name associated, and there might be sensitivities. So then people see what's been asked. Okay. Right. Conscious we only have 5 minutes. So if we wrap for you, Oliver, thank you very much for that at that point. And what I'd like to do is just pass it back, if I may, John, for a bit of a what's the next steps for DLUHC and the consultation, and then I'll do a final 1-minute wrap at the end, and we'll have you off by 12:30.
Great, thanks, David. Thanks to everybody on the panel for managing to get through all that, and thanks to everybody for all your engagement. So it's been really, really useful for myself and my colleagues on the call to see those questions coming through, to see what people are getting at. As David has said, we will take everything away and we will come back with responses on clarification. There are some answers which we can't give, as David said. For example, when's the planned laying date? It's an unknowable question at this point. But the questions we can answer and that will help people respond to the consultation, we will do so. And I would say that, the points that come across, really please make sure you do put those in your responses to the consultation, because that's exactly the sort of information that we need to see and we'd like to see. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, John. I think it's been a really useful session. I would like to very much thank panel members, because I'm very conscious when this finishes, we all get booted out, including the panel. So thank you, Tom. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Danielle. Thank you, Oliver. And of course, thank you, John. Thank you for attending the session. I was frankly fairly mildly terrified about how this might go, because there's a lot to read. I'm conscious you also are the attendees are also experts in your individual areas. Yeah. What I would say is, look, we are keen to keep this dialogue going. In order to help you respond most effectively to the consultation, whatever your viewpoint is. Yeah, we don't hold a view. We are simply wanting to facilitate that process. So if there's, we will have a look at these Q&As. If there is other things that you think would be helpful, please do contact us. I'll say particularly is it perhaps Hannah, you could put it in the chat, is it an email address or via the portal? I should have really asked this question beforehand, shouldn't I? But if all else fails, Hannah will put the sort of general, or via the website, go to the general input, and if there are things that you think would be useful, get it through to ourselves at the Future Homes Hub one way or another. But I encourage you to respond to the consultation, and bear in mind there is a separate HEM consultation. We, via a number of people that are working in this space, will be doing further work on understanding the implications. That may well lead to another seminar or specific topics, or webinar, where we can get into some detail as appropriate. But that will be quite narrow on particular topics, I suggest, rather than this rather broad general one, which helps to kind of tee things up just in front of Christmas. Think of it as an early Christmas present stocking. Thank you, John, very much for that. My wife in particular is delighted that I've got so much to read. And on that note, and giving you 1 minute of your life back so you get through to at least open one of those 40 documents, unless my fellow panel members have anything to add. Are we happy? Thank you again, and have a Merry Christmas.
Thank you.
Thanks. A good Christmas.